Hi, well this talk is about the life of a man called Hoshea, or later renamed by Moses as Yehoshua, which is precisely the same name as Jesus, Yeshua, and they both mean Yahweh is salvation. We know him of course by his anglicised name of Joshua. Now Joshua was born whilst the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, where he himself was a slave. He was around 40 years old when the 80-year-old Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, and he became a major person in the events of the Exodus. He was chosen by Moses to select and lead the men who fought in the very first Israelite battle against the Amalekites whilst they were in the Sinai Peninsula. He became Moses' assistant, or number two. We read in the chapter of Exodus 24, it says, "So Moses arose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God." Now, not too long into their journey, the Israelites arrived here. This is the wilderness of Paran. Today it's called the Negev Desert. I've spent many nights under canvas in this area. Really interesting place. And whilst here, Moses selected Joshua and 11 others to travel up into Canaan and spy out the land. All 12 were heads of the people, that is, they were leaders or captains. They were brave men, they were proven men, and they travelled a long way. It's a long way up into the Judean hills and beyond. They were gone for 40 days. And when they returned, the consensus was that it was a wonderful land, fruitful. But it says the people were strong. They said the people are stronger than us. And this created a fear amongst the Israelites. Only Caleb, more about him later, and Joshua said, "Do not fear, it's a good land and God will deliver it to us." But alas, the people, the Israelites, said no en masse. "Let us elect a new leader," they said, "and go back to Egypt, where we've come from." And God was angry with the people, and they were now to remain in the desert for 40 more years until the generation that had complained and were over 20 years old at the time had died out. All of them except for Joshua and Caleb. 40 years later, Moses was now 120 years old. They were here in the mountains of Moab, overlooking the promised land. And he urged the people, he said, "Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear, do not be afraid. God goes with you, he will not leave you nor forsake you." He then called over Joshua and he appointed him as leader. He said of Joshua, "Be strong and of good courage, for you must go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall cause them to inherit it." Moses soon died, and we read in Joshua chapter 1, it says this, "After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, 'Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you, as I said to Moses.'" And it's interesting that 3 times in a short passage, God said to Joshua, "Be strong and have courage. Do not be afraid." And we now find ourselves in a place called Shittim. Sometimes it's called Acacia Grove. That sounds a bit better. Sounds like a Hollywood suburb. But it's based just here on the eastern side of the Jordan in Moab, or today's Jordan. Now bear in mind that there are around 2.5 million Israelites. Something in that order. We know that over 600,000 men of fighting age left Egypt. The number could have grown even higher by now. They were a large group and must have been a fearsome sight to the nearby inhabitants of Jericho, just a few miles across the plain on the other side of the Jordan. Joshua told the camp to prepare their provisions. And when the Ark of the Covenant leads, they were to follow. And he then reminded them once again to be strong and very courageous. Now the first thing that Joshua did was to send 2 spies from Acacia Grove to spy out the land and to spy out Jericho in particular. It had been 40 years since they were last in the land. And they were to go and spy out Jericho. The city was surrounded by 2 parallel circular walls. They found themselves hiding out in a house that attached to the outer wall of the city. The house belonged to a prostitute named Rahab, or Rahab as we call her. She hid the spies, telling them, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you." Now the king of Jericho heard that the spies may be with Rahab, but she tricked the king and sent him off in the wrong direction, later letting the men out of the city from her window. But before they left, they made a covenant with her that she and her family would be saved if they followed their instructions. Rahab was later to live amongst the Israelites. She married an Israeli called Salman, and one of their children was a man called Boaz, who would eventually marry Ruth, the Moabitess. And Ruth and Boaz were the great grandparents of King David. While the spies returned from Jericho to Joshua, "Truly God has given us this land into our hands," they said. And so it was that the ark and the people entered the promised land, crossing the Jordan that had been miraculously stopped from flowing by a dam that occurred at a city named Adam, about 20 miles upstream. They crossed here at a place called Bethany beyond the Jordan. It's precisely the same spot where Jesus would be baptized between 12 and 1300 years later. And this place was lost for millennia until a Jordanian prince and a Jewish archaeologist found it beyond doubt in the 1990s. The Israelites built a stone memorial and settled here what they named Camp Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. Gilgal means rolled, as God had rolled away the slavery of Egypt. Camp Gilgal is not to be confused with Gilgal itself, which is just a few miles northwest of this place. Now, for the last 40 years, boys had not been circumcised. So here, Joshua ordered for all the men to be circumcised with flint knives. They called it the Hill of Foreskins. It doesn't bear thinking about. And it says that they just hid in their tents for some days until they recovered. Now, as they ate produce from the promised land, God stopped supplying them with manna for the first time in 40 years. And it was whilst they were here at Camp Gilgal that Joshua had a strange meeting. It says that he looked up, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to the man and said to him, "Are you for us, or are you for our enemies?" And the man answered him, "No." A strange answer. He said, "No, I have come as the commander of the army of the Lord." And we're told that Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take your sandal off, for the place where you stand is holy." And Joshua did just that. Now, we don't know who this person was. Some say that this was Jesus, and others say it was an angel. One day we shall find out. Either way, it must have been a great encouragement to Joshua. Now, at 900 feet below sea level, Jericho is the lowest city in the world. And at 6,000 to 7,000 years, it is the oldest continually inhabited city in the world. It's strategically situated on 2 roads. One road runs north-south and the other east-west. Archaeologists have uncovered 23 levels of civilization in Tel Jericho. The walls were constructed of large stones at the base, and mud bricks continued upwards for a total of around 40 feet, 13 meters. The width of the walls were around 8 feet, 2.5 meters wide. The people lived between the 2 double walls. These double walls were enormous and overwhelming in size and in strength. There's been some debate about the dating of the walls from Joshua's time. The archaeologist John Garstang thought he had found them at precisely the right time. Kathleen Kenyon thought they were from 150 years later. The Egyptologist David Roll has revised the dating and discovered fallen walls and burned buildings at another level in the diggings, and has detailed this in his brilliant book, The Test of Time. And he's convinced that the devastation and burning is right at Joshua's time. Now, as a side note, Jericho was given by Mark Antony to Cleopatra, the Pharaoh of Egypt, as a wedding gift in 36 BC. And in Jesus' time, King Herod would build a winter palace in Jericho, and he would later die here. The taking of Jericho by the Israelites was a success, but the next city was a disaster. Ai is based just here. It was a large city and had at least 12,000 inhabitants. It wasn't as large as Jericho, but it was a big city. It's believed to be the same place as Ephraim. After raising Lazarus from the dead, Jesus and his disciples came here to stay a while. Archaeological evidence shows that this place was occupied and destroyed by fire during the very time of Joshua. Now, at first the men of Ai struck down 36 Israelite men and chased them for miles. It says that the hearts of the people, that's the Israelites, melted like water at this apparent defeat. But God was not with them. Two problems. A man called Achan had disobeyed God's strict commands and kept some plunder for himself. But arguably even worse, it says that they did not consult the Lord before attacking Ai. It was a common mistake over the next 30 or more years. When things went wrong, it is almost always because the people did not incline their ear towards the Lord, as the Bible says. They went off in their own strength. Now, there's an important lesson in this. After this first failure over Ai, God did give them victory. It's important to realise that the sins of the Canaanites were terrible. And it seems that the more archaeology uncovers, the worse it gets. Sins that involved child sacrifice and many other things that the Lord, it says, found detestable. But God was very patient. In Genesis, hundreds of years earlier, God said to Abraham that he will have many descendants that will inherit the land in which Abraham journeyed to, the promised land. However, he tells Abraham, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. This is their time in Egypt. And it continues, in the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, when the sin of the Amorites has reached its full measure. And now that sin had reached its full measure. Joshua would now take the people to this place. He stood between two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, and the people there renewed their covenant with their God, Yahweh. Now a strange thing happened. A tired and haggard-looking group of people with old sacks on their donkeys and old wineskins and old patched sandals came to Joshua at Gilgal. And they said to him, we've come from a far country to make a covenant with you. We've heard about the name of Yahweh, your God. We've heard of his fame and all that he did in Egypt. Therefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, take provisions with you for the journey and go and meet the Israelites and say to them, we are your servants. Now therefore make a covenant with us. See how mouldy our food is. And so Joshua made a covenant with them. And 3 days later they realized that they'd been duped. These men had come from the nearby city of Gibeon. Gibeon is based just here, about 6 miles north of Jerusalem. It was to be the hometown of King Saul some 350 years later. It was a very high city up in the mountains. And the tabernacle was based here during the reigns of David and Solomon, before the temple was built. Soon after becoming king, Solomon came here, and it was at Gibeon where we read the Lord appeared to Solomon and asked what he wanted to be given, and he would ask for wisdom. We read in Joshua chapter 10 that Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities. It was greater than Ai, and all its men were mighty. Well, the Israelites regretted their haste, and once again it says that they did not ask counsel of the Lord at that time. And we now read that the king of Jerusalem heard about the defeat of Ai. He also heard that Gibeon had made a covenant with Israel, and he gathered together 4 other kings and their armies to attack Gibeon. Gibeon was to call on Joshua for assistance. We read of a mighty battle that took place, and by nightfall they'd not quite defeated the 4 kings. And so in an extraordinary display of faith, Joshua shouted for the day to be extended, and he called out for the sun to stand still. God was astonished, it says. And it says that there's been no day like it before or since, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man. God heard the idea of a man and thought it was a good one. Soon they'd taken all the main cities in the south: Gezer, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, Debir, Gaza, and more. Now the king of Hazor heard about all of this. Hazor is based up in the north, just here. He too gathered many other kings and their armies to defeat the Israelites, and it says that the army that they gathered together was huge, as many as the sand on the seashore. They were fearsome, it says. And God said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid because of them, for tomorrow about this time I will deliver you." Have you noticed that God was always telling them to not be afraid but be courageous? And all of this happened here at the waters of Meron. It was a lake just about 10 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. Today it's silted up and it's become a fertile piece of land. But back then it was a reasonable sized lake. And we're told that Joshua took the whole land, that no peoples apart from Gibeon made peace with Israel. The rest of Joshua's time was to do with dividing up the land between the 12 tribes. There's an interesting little note about Caleb. Do you remember Caleb, the other of the 12 spies that said, "Be strong, let's take the land now. God is with us," he said. Well, he now approached Joshua and reminded him that 40 years earlier Moses had promised him some land. And he said, "Give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke of in that day." And Joshua gave him that mountain and the city of Hebron as his inheritance. 30 or so years later, at the age of 110, Joshua gathered all the people and the leaders together, and he said to them, "Oh, you shall possess their land as the Lord your God promised you. Therefore be very courageous to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, lest you turn aside from it to the right hand or to the left, and lest you go amongst these nations, those who remain among you. You shall not make mention of the name of their gods, nor cause anyone to swear by their gods. You shall not serve their gods, nor bow down to them, but you shall hold fast to the Lord your God, as you have done to this day. Behold, this day I am going the way of all the earth. Now therefore fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in truth. Put away the gods which others serve. Serve the Lord. Choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, the God which your father served, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." After this, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old, and they buried him within the border of his inheritance at Timnath-Serah, which is in the mountains of Ephraim on the north side of Mount Gaash. You can see Mount Gaash in this picture. Now, some 300 or more years earlier, Joseph had bought some land in Shechem for 100 pieces of silver, and the Israelites had carried his bones around for the last 70 years, and they now laid him to rest at the very spot that he had requested. Well, what can we learn just briefly? By the way, did you know that Joshua is regarded as a prophet? Indeed, the book of Joshua is in the Jewish section of the Bible called the Former Prophets. It is not a history book, and there never is or was a history section in Jesus' Bible. These are not the words of God as we read in the latter prophets, but we read them to find out more about God. They are prophetic. We find out what pleases him, what displeases him, how he thinks, how he reacts, what he looks for in us. And if you read these former prophets with that mindset, then you will get much more out of them. We also learn that God loves to work in cooperation with us. Time and time again he worked with the Israelites, and they needed to work with him. And to do that, they needed to inquire of him. And too often they failed to do so. How easy it is to be so busy, distracted, or so self-reliant that we forget to inquire of the Lord. We forget to incline our ear towards him and give him the opportunity to have a say in directing our path. We need to be very deliberate about that. Also, we should not fail to take notice of the many times that God said to them, "Don't be afraid, instead be courageous." Now, if we are going to stand for God's truth in today's culture of relativity, then we too will need to know what it is to remain courageous. Scripture is very clear that we should expect increasing persecution as the time for Jesus' return approaches. Society will put us under greater and greater pressure. This is very true of today's culture. Standing up for God's truth is going to get harder today, not easier. We will need courage. Finally, Joshua, as we've said, shared the same name as Jesus. And he's a little foretaste of Jesus. Joshua, who led the people into God's inheritance, reminds us of Jesus, who will return one day as a conquering king. And he will take those who remain faithful to him home to their inheritance. As we look to him who is the author and the finisher of our faith, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus, our beloved Messiah. God bless.